So I think you touched upon something very interesting, which is the notion of experience. So as a product manager, how should you be thinking about product experience, or what encapsulates product experience?
Well, it starts with your out of box experience, turning the thing on, being able to do something useful with it quickly, as opposed to, hate to keep beating on Microsoft, but I enjoy it. Uh, Turning on, a Microsoft Office uh, product, and it says, by the way, you're on a deadline and you're going to get fired if you don't get that spreadsheet to your boss in 30 minutes. It makes Microsoft, out of its sheer, I don't know what you call it, hatred for the customer, requires you to update the software before you could do any real work, rather than saying, hey, would you like to do it now or do it later? And you notice Apple does that when you get an operating system update. It asks you, do you want to do it now or do you want to do it tonight when hopefully you're sleeping? Uh, so that lack of consideration of what the customer wants to do. I'll give you another example. Back in 2018, I went to Singapore to give a speech at a product management festival. And then Cisco, who's my number one client worldwide, asked me to come to Bangalore and train about 20, 25 product managers. So I needed to get to Bangalore from Singapore. And I was also being brought over by Manipal University to give lectures on product management to places like Dell and Samsung and a few other companies, Philips. And so the thing that I had to do was to get from the hotel I was in Singapore to a hotel in Bangalore. Well, that sounds pretty simple, but there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. What mode of transportation do I want to use from the Singapore hotel to the airport? Because in Singapore, you could take a taxi, you could take an Uber, you could take a shuttle, you could take the train, you could hijack a car or a motorcycle. And then you have to figure out how long it's going to take to get there so you could leave in the earliest amount of time. Well, I like to get to the airport early because in my advanced age, I only like to fly business class. And that gives you free access to the business class lounge where the free food is. So I figured all that out, got to the airport, walked into the terminal. And if you've ever been to the Singapore airport, it's slightly larger than Manhattan. And you have no idea where to go, and you're looking at the signs and they got arrows pointing all over the place. Reminded me of Heathrow about 10 years ago. You get off the airplane at Heathrow, there are no signs. Typical British thing, you're supposed to be born with a map of Heathrow on your forehead. So luckily there was an information desk straight ahead. And I walked up to the information desk and I said, where's the check-in? And I forget which airline I was flying on. And she pointed as only a couple rows over, maybe about 3 or 4 miles. And I'm saying to myself, my phone has an app on it called TripIt, and it knew at what time I needed to get to the airport and what flight I need to get on and what airline. And my phone also has GPS. My phone knew where I was at and knows from the maps inside the airport of which counter to go to. Why couldn't my phone wake up and just have a little arrow that says go over here? And it'll take you, 5 minutes to walk there or whatever it may be. So I mentioned that when I gave a talk at Samsung after I finally got into India. And after the presentation, the Samsung folks in Bangalore write the Android operating system for Samsung's Android phones. So the VP of product management says, wouldn't someone feel kind of weird if their phone woke up and all of a sudden giving them directions? I said, no, not if the phone asked permission first, which is a notion that Samsung and Microsoft for years don't know. If you ask permission, it's perfectly okay for Siri to tell you where to go. So I get over to that check-in, and she says, I'm sorry, we're not checking in here. You have to go to the other aisle all the way on the other end of the terminal and check in there. So I wander down there, pulling my luggage behind me. I get there. And she says, "Where's your ticket to leave India?" I said, "My schedule hasn't been firmed up by Manipal University. I don't know when I'm going to leave India." She says, "You can't come to India unless you could prove you're going to leave India." I said, "Trust me, you got enough people as it is. You don't need me in India, and I have absolutely no intention of staying there." She said, "Sorry, you can't go unless you can prove you're going to leave." And I didn't know that. My phone probably knew that because it might have read the fine print someplace that says you got to have a ticket out to use a ticket in. So I said, "Okay, where do I get a ticket out?" She says, "Go over to Singapore Airlines." And I said, "Where's that?" And pointed over there. There's all sorts of construction going on. So I wandered around, went all the way back to where the first ticket counter was. There was another information desk that says, "Oh, it's at the other end of this particular ticket counter." Went all the way back, stood in line there for about 15, 20 minutes. And the Singapore airline lady says, "We don't go to Bangalore." I said, "Okay, well, how do I get a ticket to out of Bangalore so I can go to Bangalore?" And she says, "Go to the travel agency in the other terminal, which is like in Chicago. That's how far away." And I wasn't going to walk that far. So I don't know, I don't want to do that. She says, "Well, you can buy it online." By this time, I was really hungry, and I looked up, and it was almost like a vision from God. There was a restaurant on the mezzanine. So I went up the stairs, sat down at the restaurant, ordered breakfast, and then proceeded to try to get on Wi-Fi because the SIM card I bought that was supposed to be universal and work everywhere didn't work. And in order to sign in at that time on Wi-Fi at the Singapore airport, you had to get a PIN number, which they send you via text message, which is wonderful, but the SIM card doesn't work. Uh, so I asked the waitress where could I get the password to get onto Wi-Fi. She says, "At that information counter." I said, "The one at the other end of the terminal?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "That's the one I was just at." So I left my stuff there, hoping nobody would steal it. Went downstairs, crossed the terminal, got a slip of paper with the car, password on it. Went back to the restaurant. By that time, my breakfast was cold. I was tired of staring at the little screen of the iPhone, so I pulled out my iPad, and it was a completely different user interface that I had already learned how to use, trying to access Wi-Fi at the Singapore airport. Now, am I the only person in the world that has these problems? Probably. But anyone who would think this through or observe by understanding what people traveling through the Singapore airport want to do, that they would all be going through these same problems. So I finally got a ticket, finished my breakfast, went downstairs. They gave me a boarding pass to pass through security to go to India because I could prove I was going to leave India. And then it's another hour-long story trying to get a refund on that ticket, which I never used. So that's what I talk about, customer experience. And that's what Steve was talking about when he had this bad out-of-box experience. Sometimes some products I get, I wonder if the senior executive staff ever bothered to try to use the product, or any of if they bothered to focus at all on user experience. And again, those companies that do tend to thrive. Those companies that don't tend to go out of business.
In the example that David talks about his experience of coming into India with the airline, with the airport, the key essence and the message that he passes on is to really look at customer journeys when you're really thinking product management. Do you think of the service experience? Do you think of the bottlenecks that the customers would face? Would you have a problem with using the product? Have you used the product? And if you're somebody building the product, and if you are somebody in senior management, there's always somebody to help you, and you don't experience the problem or the pain that an ordinary customer goes through. But when you really look at end-to-end journeys, you realize that there are several knots to make the experience phenomenal. You need to really look at it from the time somebody leaves the hotel to the airport to the check-in to the lounge to finally taking a flight to the country, where he was landing. Everything is an experience. So when you're thinking of a product, it's not just enough if you think only of one particular component or a module. You need to think on it holistically, and that's the most important aspect of product management.